Hello, I'm artist Wanaree Tanner here at Cool Tools to demonstrate my Spinning Henna Bloom Earrings. Here's what we're going to need for this project. Henna Bloom Texture Plate Asian Design Set 1. There's a variety of images on here, and if you'll notice there's rolling tracks on either sides of the texture plate to help keep your texture in frame, as well as spillaway grooves for the clay to escape as you roll. This will help get you clean and consistent depth and texture. A set of rolling frames and roller, alpha abrasive sanding sticks, 180 and 100 grit on either side, a needle tool for cutting your design out, a fine point Princeton 12-aught mini angle shader brush, a Sharpie, a set of foam refinement tools, and I'll talk about those a little bit later. I like to use Easy 960 because it's stronger and we're doing kind of a thinner earring. We want it to be lighter, so that extra strength really makes a nice difference. You'll also need a rolling folder, which I'll be demonstrating later, some Scotch tape, lubricant for your texture plate, I prefer Cool Tools Cool Slip, a millimeter measuring ruler. Here are the spinning earrings we'll be working on today. As you can see, it features a spinning panel and a seamless earring wire, which I'll be demonstrating how we'll make. For the earring wires, you'll also need 16 gauge sterling silver tube, 20 gauge sterling silver wire, a fine point sanding burr, a cup burr, and a mandrel, as well as a cutting disc. We'll be using these heads with the rotary tool, and I'll be demonstrating a fast and easy way to cut tubing. You'll also need a ceramic tile, and I like to use a clay hydrator. Let's get started. So the first thing we're going to need to do is texture our panel. You're going to take out your rolling folder. You can see here it opens and it's got plastic on two sides. This is going to prevent the clay from sticking on your work surface as well as sticking on the roller. All we need to do to begin with is just lightly lubricate the rolling folder. So just do one spray from a little distance away and just smooth it inside the folder. So we're going to be texturing down to 2 cards, but we're going to roll down our slab to 4 cards. These texture plates feature a really deep relief, so the designs are actually about 2 cards thick. So when you do it in this way, always slabbing down at a larger thickness, typically 2 cards thicker than what you want to end up with, and that's how you'll get the nicest, cleanest quality impressions out of these plates. So we'll start at 4 and then texture down to 2. So you want to get out about half of your clay and just slab it down. So I'm going to open this and turn it so that it covers the entire texture design. So just open your rolling folder and remove your rolling frame. Next, you're going to need to lubricate your texture plate. If this is the first time you're using your texture plate, make sure to rub the lubricant into the details slightly with your fingertips. Just spray the Cool Slip from a few inches away and work it into the design. You don't need a lot of liquid, just enough to cover the texture plate lightly. Then you're going to take your rolling frame and place it around your design. Then transfer your plastic and clay right on top of your texture. I like to leave the plastic in place. I don't like to pick up my clay often because every time you pick up your clay, you're distorting that depth and thickness. So for rolling this out, the best way to do this is to roll firmly in one direction so that you don't get ghosting of lines. Ghosting is what happens when you roll back and forth and you get kind of like a double image in your impression. So again, firmly pressing down, working in one direction. I'm just going to roll right over that texture. Keep that plastic in place and you can just burnish your design lightly from the back side. This is going to help work that clay into the finer details. Then you're going to carefully peel away your plastic. You don't want it to stick to it. As much as possible, you want your clay to stay in place, because if you dislodge this clay, it can again cause ghosting of lines. So to transfer it onto our fixed work surface, which is a ceramic tile, Pick up your clay and your texture plate in one hand and your ceramic tile in the other, and just flip the ceramic tile right onto the surface of the clay, being careful not to move it around. Flip the entire assembly over and press from the back side. This is going to help you dislodge the clay from the texture plate. And then pull back the texture plate and you have a beautiful clean impression. To cut it out, we're going to take our needle tool. We're actually going to use both of our hands to cut this out. So you're going to actually move the work surface with your left hand to help guide that needle as you're working it with your right hand. The other thing to keep in mind is watch where your needle tool is going, not where it's at. Kind of imagine it's kind of like driving. Look ahead so that you don't get caught up with where you're at. So just start on the inside and work out towards the petals. As you can see, these texture plates actually create a groove, which makes cutting these designs out much easier. So I'm not being overly perfect with them. I just want to make sure to get the entire impression. Now you can see here I slightly miscut this point. Don't even worry about it. Just cut around it and push the clay slightly, and we'll be able to repair that during refinement. Go ahead and pull your clay off. And you'll notice I've never picked up my clay slab or my textured clay, because every time you pick that design up, you're actually distorting it. So that little cut we made is a pretty simple repair. I just take my paintbrush with a little bit of water on it, and not a lot, just moist. And I'm just going to wipe that little schmutz away. So the clay is still wet, and I'm being careful to just tap that lightly. So we need to leave this on the tile until it dries completely. Go ahead and put it in your dehydrator for 10 to 15 minutes. Now that your panel's completely dry, you'll want to go ahead and refine it. You can see here you have some larger pieces that are still left on your design, and you want to get it right up to the border. Typically what I like to do is remove the larger sections quickly with just the sanding stick. It doesn't take much at all, and you can see I'm not trying to get it perfectly up against the line, because we're actually going to clean this up with the wet refinement process and the foam tool. So we're just taking the big chunks out, if you have any. That's all it needs. Oh, let's hit this one a little bit more. And that's all it needs. You can see there's still some roughness around here. To repair that, all we're going to do is take our foam tool, dip just the tip lightly into water. I call this process wet refinement, but really it's more working damp than wet. You just want the tip of that foam tool to just be slightly moistened. Easy 960 is a really water-friendly formula. The particles are much finer, so it doesn't take much work at all for water to refine it. If you're using a different brand of silver clay, you will notice that it takes a little longer for this water refinement process. Here you can see it just takes a couple of quick swipes to erase any inconsistencies. And it really smooths out that edge and it saves that border line. Oftentimes when we try to sand right up to the border, we end up losing some of that design. This method allows you to leave a little bit of room and smooth out and keep a nice thick border without ruining your texture design. You can see where our little repair there from earlier, we're just going to rub that spot down slightly and smooth it out. Not a big deal at all. You come to the back side and you can work those edges a little bit as well. You will notice that Easy 960 softens really quickly with just a little bit of moisture. So you just want to make sure to brace your piece with your fingertips as you're working. Don't work out in outer space. Give yourself a little bit of support there. Now this piece is fully refined, go ahead and place it back in your dehydrator for 10 to 15 minutes to dry completely, and then you'll want to repeat this process for the second panel. Then I'll show you how to make the earring wires and how we'll drill our hole. The next thing we'll do is drill the holes in the center of our panels for our earring wires. To do this, you can use a drill bit, but I prefer to use a sanding burr. And now you can use the sanding burr by hand, or if you have a handheld rotary tool, go ahead and put it in your rotary tool. This is a Ford micromotor portable, and it actually has a rechargeable battery. It's really lightweight, so it's easy to use for metal clay. And you can control the speed and the power with this dial. So it's a really simple piece of equipment to use, and it really makes fast work of drilling holes. So first thing we're going to do is make our mark for our holes. Just take your needle tool and give yourself a starting point on both panels. And you'll notice Easy 960 is really soft, so it's not difficult to make marks onto the surface at all. You want to turn on your rotary tool, turn up your power slightly, and just pick up your panel. Now you're going to brace the back with your fingertip. This isn't going to hurt you at all. You can actually touch the tip of this. It's still going pretty slow, so you're not going to damage your skin. And just where you put that mark, go ahead and place your sanding burr. You can see how quickly that works. So it goes right through with no problem. We're going to make that hole a little bit bigger to accommodate our ear wires. So if you look on the surface here, there's an inner hole. You want your hole for your ear wire to actually be around this ring here. So you want to cover that entire ring if you need a little reference point here for how big you want your hole. So I'm just going to sand that little bit away. And then repeat the process with the other side. Now if you want, you can come in with a larger burr to clean up that hole since this one's so small. Just come in and this will just even out your mark slightly and clean up those edges. There you go, and now your pieces are ready to fire. Once the henna bloom panels are completely dry, we're ready to fire. So we've got both of our panels here, and I like to fire on a firing shelf. This is just a ceramic firing shelf with a little bit of alumina hydrate on the surface. Alumina hydrate almost acts like a lubricant on the surface of that kiln shelf. Sometimes with bigger pieces, if you're using silver clay directly onto a ceramic shelf, it can actually drag from the pressure as it's trying to move and shrink. When metal clay fires, it actually shrinks a certain percentage. Easy 960 shrinks about 10 to 12%, which is nice, so there's not as much distortion, but it's still possible with really complicated pieces, so I just like to be thorough. Typically what I'll do is just shake my ceramic shelf and then just place my earrings right onto the powder. As this fire, the particles of alumina hydrate actually move out of the way and act like little tiny ball bearings. It helps the clay shrink together smoothly. We're going to go ahead and put this in our kiln on 1/2-inch kiln posts and fire it at 1675 for 2 hours. If you have a muffle kiln and you're not comfortable firing as hot, you can fire at a lower temperature for longer. Just check your package. Now while those are firing in the kiln, we're going to go ahead and make our ear wires. So for the earring wires, we're going to start out with our sterling silver tube. The earring wire mechanism is just a 20-gauge wire fed inside of a 16-gauge tube, which then you can open slightly and close. So that wire just slides right back into that opening. So you get a nice seamless effect. Traditionally, to cut the tubes, you would use a handsaw, but if you have a handheld rotary tool, you can make this much simpler. All you need is a mandrel and a cutting disc. If you've never used a mandrel before, you just open and remove the screw, place the disc back onto the screw and screw it back into place. Just place the mandrel in your rotary tool and now it's ready to be used. For cutting the tubes, you'll often get this silver tubing in longer lengths, so you'll need to cut it down. And there's a little trick to getting even lengths. If you just try to cut them all separately, sometimes you'll end up with one a little longer than another. And if you're doing production work, this is a really great way to expedite the process. Just take a piece of Scotch tape. You can also use packing tape. Place it on the 2 wires, or place it on the 2 tubes. And then fold that tape over. What this is going to do is now hold these tubes together, and when we do one cut, we're actually cutting both. For the earring tubes, they're going to need to be 75 millimeters long. So take your ruler and measure out 75 millimeters. So 75 millimeters, and make your mark with a Sharpie. Go ahead and mark it on the tape, flip it over, and mark all the way through. Use a couple pieces of ceramic tile to brace the tubing, and turn on your rotary tool. I've got this set about to speed 7 for this cut, and all you're going to do is this disc is actually going to do the work for you. You're not going to force or press down. Just allow it to cut. And just follow that line. And flip it over and come in from the other side. As you can see, I'm bracing the tubing with my left hand and just using my right hand to guide that cutter right through the tubing. Okay, now the tubes are cut apart. You can see just the tape is in place, and just pull that right apart. Now you can go ahead and finish the tubes by just sanding them on the end of this cutting bit. This will flatten it out and clean up your edges. And again, doing these pieces together, taped in this way, will prevent you from cutting one side longer than another. I'm just going to tear that extra tape off and just sand that down. As you can see, it takes no time at all for that tubing to become sanded and even. Turn off your rotary tool, and then you can remove your tape. And there you have 2 nicely cut, perfect tubing. Now that the tubes are cut for the earring wires, you just want to use your fine point sanding burr and make sure to open up the ends. As we're grinding and sanding or cutting the ends, we can actually distort the opening. Just want to put our sanding burr in there and twist to clean it up. And repeat on both sides of both pieces of tubing. Once that's complete, we're ready to feed our earring wire through that tubing. So the way this earring works is it's actually a piece of 22 gauge wire fed through this 16 gauge tubing. We actually leave a space open here so that the wire can be put in and closed for a seamless, secure effect. Our earring wires we're actually going to cut to 85 millimeters. So it's 10 millimeters longer than our earring tube. We're going to feed the wire inside the tubing, leaving 20 millimeters hanging out. This 20 millimeters is actually going to form the earring wire. And we're going to leave this space again so that earring wire has a place to set. The shape of this tubing and ear wire is actually what holds the entire assembly together. So you don't have to worry about soldering or fixing anything permanently. So we're just going to feed this wire into the tube. If you notice it catching at all, like it's starting to do, you may just need to straighten your wire out a little bit or check your hole. Once it becomes difficult to feed it through, you can just take your pliers and push it through, or what I like to do is just tap it on my work surface. This takes a little bit of time. You want to make sure to get a nice grip with your pliers when you're doing this. We want to make sure to hold on to that wire while we're tapping. As you can see, I've left just 20 millimeters hanging out here, and that's going to form our earring wire. And the wire hasn't reached all the way to the end of the tubing because, again, we want to leave that open. Sometimes with the ear wires, you have a really easy time getting the wire in, and it goes right into the tubing. And again, you slide it in and just leave that 20 millimeters hanging out. Now we're ready to form our ear wires. To form our ear wires, what I like to do is again tape the pieces together. This will help us keep a clean and consistent shape on both pieces, so it doesn't make it difficult to match our design. Make sure to stick it on the tape so the tube is even. Just press the tubing together and the wires together. And go ahead and fold the tape down. Just tuck those pieces together a little tightly. Okay, now you're ready to form your earring shape. If you take a look here, it's kind of like a curved little oval shape that flattens out. It's flattened at the top here so that tubing stays flush to your earlobe so that it doesn't hang out or become askew. So we're just going to start forming that shape from the back side here. Push that tubing. Now if you want measurements, so right from the very tip, the edge of that tube to our first bend is about 35 millimeters. So if you want to be really specific, you can go ahead and come on here and mark it at 35 millimeters. Then go ahead and make your bend backwards at that point. Now you see I'm just using the tip of the pliers because I want to create a little bit of a flattened space for those panels to sit on. So again, remember, this is the back side of the earring. I'm just going to turn this now, give myself a little bit of room, and just force this here. Put your pliers right at the crook of your bend there, just with the tips, and push this up. Now you can add a little bit of curvature as you work as well. So you just start curving that front section. And if you have a pair of forming pliers, you can use those instead as well. The tape will actually protect the silver from getting too marred up. If you are going to use forming pliers like this though, instead of using Scotch tape, you'll want to use masking tape or painter's tape because it's a little thicker, and again it's going to help support that silver and keep you from putting dents on it. So I'm going to go back to my nylon pliers and just add that curvature. You can see all I'm doing is hanging on to it and then putting just a slight bend in the wires. So you can see this is the shape that I'm going for. Now I'm going to push the back piece towards the front. You can go ahead and take our tape off. Now you're ready to form the rest of the earring. As you can see here, this is kind of the shape we've got going. So we just need to form the second section here where the ear wire actually is going to go inside the tubing. I just do this with my fingers to start out with. I'm going to do that bend, then come in with my pliers again, and just with the tip, bend it so that wire meets up with the tubing. So you only need just a couple millimeters inside that tubing. You don't want it to be too long. If you leave it long like this, it's really difficult to get that earring wire back into the tube and close it. So we're just going to leave a couple little millimeters hanging out there. Okay. Now we need to clean up that edge so that it'll fit back in the tubing. So again, we're going to need our rotary tool, this time with the cup burr in place. This is a 1 millimeter cup burr to fit our 20 gauge wire. We're just going to turn our rotary tool on. Just turn that a little bit open and just get the tip of the wire. What this is going to do is actually round the edge of the wire out and make it easier for it to go in and out of that tubing, as well as not damage your earlobe as you're putting it on. And that's it, just a couple little swipes. And then you can see you've got an earring wire that fits right in. Now if you wanted to reshape this or reform this along with the other one, if you don't care for this shape, just tape them back together and just press them as you need to reform it. Here I've got a little bit smoother curvature. This is a little more extreme curvature. So you can really change the effect of these earrings by just altering the shape of the earring wires slightly. Once you've formed your silver earring wires, go ahead and put them in a tumbler for about an hour to 2 hours to work harden that wire so that it'll keep that shape while you're wearing it. Now that our pieces are completely fired, you can see they come out of the kiln kind of a whitish grayish color. Now sometimes you have to keep in mind that alumina hydrate can discolor the surface of your silver a little bit, but it's not a big deal. We're going to be able to polish it off. If you have any alumina hydrate remaining on your piece, just brush it off. And we're going to patina right onto the fire scale. As you can see, I'm wearing gloves because I'm going to be using Black Max patina, which is a little bit more caustic, so you want to be careful with it. The nice thing about Black Max is you can patina it black right onto the fire scale surface, so you don't have to brass brush your piece before patina. Wear a glove. Take a Q-tip and just wet the tip of the Q-tip, and you're not going to need much Black Max at all. As you can see, it immediately changes the color of the silver. Flip it over and do the back as well. Now you want to go ahead and rinse your piece off in some water that's about room temperature, or the same temperature as your Black Max. You don't want to rinse it off in cold water or hot water because it can actually cause a white stain to appear on the patina. So always try to keep your water temperature about the same as your Black Max. Once you've patinaed both pieces, we're ready to polish. I like to use 3M 400 grit polishing papers that I cut into smaller squares, and I'll fold them up to give myself a little bit harder edge to work with. So I'll fold my piece up like this and just begin polishing the surface. You can see that Black Max comes right off and gives you a beautiful contrast. To get the finer details, use the corners of the folded polishing paper. And it'll get into those little tiny fine lines that make this such a beautiful texture. So we're going to keep working in this manner all the way around until we've polished the entire piece. Don't forget to work the edges and the back as well. So once you've got your details polished out, you can see the 400 grit polishing paper gives you kind of a matte or satin finish on the surface of the silver. This can actually be a really nice contrast with a Black Max, and it'd be a lot more readable than a polished finished. As you can see here on these polished earrings, these have actually been tumbled for about half an hour. So the difference in the visibility of the design is pretty apparent, but some people like the high polish versus the satin a little bit better, so it's really just about personal preference. So now I've tumbled both of these pieces, they're ready to be assembled. Just open your earring wire, turn slightly, put it face front. Now you can close your earring wire back up, it slides right together. Now you have a pair of match spinning henna bloom earrings.
Visit our Learning Center at cooltools.us for more cool jewelry making videos. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and be sure to sign up for our email list to be the first to hear about new videos, new products, and other cool stuff from Cool Tools.